Welcome to Be the Glitter. I'm so happy that you're here and you have so much amazing insight to share. Without any further ado, Dr. William Cox, I would love it if you would introduce yourself the way you like to be known.
Sure. My full name is William Taylor Cox. I go by Will and Dr. Cox professionally, but I don't make anyone call me that in real life. I have a PhD in social psychology, studying your brain's learning mechanisms and the way that we learn things that don't serve us well, things like stereotypes, biases, superstitions, stuff like that. And specifically teaching people how to overcome those sorts of things, how to reduce bias.
My pronouns are she, they. What are your
Oh,
pronouns?
he, him.
Thank you. If you don't mind, some of us love to hear our different identity stories. People know that I came out a few years ago as a writer and bisexual at the same time, and no one was surprised. Are you okay with sharing your identity story and maybe
Um,
dovetailing that into how you got your PhD?
yeah, so going before that, my identity is really complicated because I'm adopted, and partially interracially adopted. So my mom is Native Hawaiian, Chinese, Portuguese, and my dad's white from Kentucky. And me and two of my brothers are white. I have a Puerto Rican brother and sister. So racial ethnic identity is complex. When I used to teach classes to undergraduates, I'd be like, ethnicity is complicated.
That's awesome. Or
so
beautiful, depending on how you look at it.
Yeah, so that's where the probably unfamiliar name, middle name comes in, La'imaka. It's my Hawaiian name. Yeah, so because of all of that, and because my dad was in the army, we grew up moving all over the world, all over the United States. So different cultures were a big part of my upbringing, even outside of my own family. I always had these understandings about race and bias, and when I would move to different places, I'd always be interested in like how people habitually see the world in different ways, and that always fascinated me. Treat my husband like another. It's great. Yeah.
That's a wonderful, colorful story. Does that have anything to do with informing why you set out for the PhD that you did?
Yeah, so I was always very scientifically minded. I was also just very into social activism on campus related to racism and LGBT and gender, all of the above. One day, I took a social psychology class and discovered that there's this whole area of science devoted to experimentally, empirically testing and studying and understanding these social problems that I really cared about. And it blew me away. A great teacher can change the course of your life. I appreciate Jody so much. And now she's one of my colleagues now that I'm a PhD. Anyway, so I got into a psychology lab and started doing research, and that really interested me. And then I applied for PhD programs, and I got into the PhD program at UW-Madison with Patricia Devine, who's one of the most famous prejudice researchers in the world. So it was a great opportunity for me. And then I went to UW-Madison, got my PhD studying all these sorts of things, developing methods to help people overcome bias and then testing those methods. And that became more and more of what I did. At first, it was a lot of science and a lot of applying the science and testing our methods to reduce bias. But we had such success that people started calling us and emailing us wanting like the methods that we use and the training that we do. And so then that expanded and became my nonprofit, Inequity Agents of Change, where we put all that science to work for public good. So evidence-based approaches to help with diversity, reduce bias, DEI, as a lot of people call it these days, all that stuff.
Yes. And so there's been an interesting history just over the past few years regarding DEI.
Yeah, everyone, including all my colleagues who work in this area, are all committed to the idea that we need some kind of DEI. We need practices to just help overcome the realities of the fact that human beings, our brains, have biases, and we need to work on that. And there are problems out in the world that we can improve. So the kind of big idea of DEI. But even before the recent backlash to DEI, a lot of my colleagues and myself have been critical of particular DEI programs that are out in the public that are not evidence-based. And there are a number of reasons for this. And also, we're using this umbrella term DEI because it's the best term we have. But I often like to say it's like using the word movies. If I dislike one movie, I don't decide, oh, all movies suck. DEI that's not very good. There's DEI that's a little good. There's DEI that I'm bragging about our group. We have some pretty impressive evidence that a lot of our DEI does a lot of good. But there are people who've experienced a bad DEI and then they're like, oh, see, this is what all DEI is. I believe you said when we were talking off mic, you were like,
Yeah.
it's like they're stereotyping DEI. And
Yes.
yeah, it is very like that. So for scientists like myself, we're in a weird position because we've criticized DEI for many years. I've been doing this work 20 years now. And if you can look through, we have articles in the Washington Post and New York Times, not written by me, but by colleagues of mine, where we
Mhm.
say, hey, look, people are pulling together DEI programs. They have factual information in it. They're sharing true facts. We're not saying they're lying or anything like that,
Right.
but it's not built in what we would call a model of cognitive behavioral change. One of the biggest truths of human behavior is that giving people information is one of the worst ways to change people's behavior. You have to, there's a lot of skill and science behind how to effectively help people change their behavior. And a lot of these DEI programs that are just like, here's how bias happens, and here's this bad thing that happened in this workplace, and so on. It gives people information, but it doesn't give them a way to meaningfully change their behavior. And then it turns a lot of people off as part of what has led to this, I think, current backlash.
That makes a lot of sense to me. And to your point, if you just give people a whole bunch of information, that's not necessarily going to change their mind. In fact, if anything, they're going to have a negative reaction to it. And if you just entice somebody, like you could tell somebody, don't eat more popcorn, for example. But if you just give them endless popcorn, guess what? They're just going to keep eating popcorn mindlessly until it's all gone. Just because you told them to do something doesn't
Yeah.
mean they're going to make that choice.
Like environmental science is a great example. This is one of the big areas where this has been studied. So what we're talking around, it's called the information deficit model. So it's like I assume that you don't have the right information to make what I think is the right decision as the
Yes.
scientist who studies this stuff. And so I'm like, so I'll give you the information and then you'll make the right decision. And that's just been disproven time and time again. Environmental science is a big area of that. When people start talking about climate change and global warming and hurricanes and so on, that's all true information that scientists are sharing, but then people freak out or they're like, oh, I just don't want to think about that. And so they don't get to the part where here are some practical things you can do to change your behavior.
They
They
don't
shut
like
it
the
out.
information, so they choose to not believe it.
Yeah, most people's personal values are very opposed to expressing bias. So we're not just giving them information, we're connecting it to meaningful, personally important personal values. And once you make that connection, then people are interested and they're like, oh, so you can teach me a couple of tools that'll help me overcome bias, kind of retrain my mind or help me in interpersonal interactions. And then that's what we do. And one last thing on the kind of bad DEI side of things. So one of the big things that sometimes happens. So if you have you heard the term implicit bias before?
Yeah.
That's a common term out there. And it's a term I've used in research papers. I'm not trashing the term at all. But there are some of these DEI trainings that are about implicit bias. And then they're teach people, oh, there are ways you could express racism, express race bias without even realizing it. And so then the people are like, if it's outside of my awareness, if I'm not even realizing it, there's nothing I can do about it. And so they feel helpless. And people have actually seen in research studies, it gets, if they do it with instructors like educators, teachers get some of that messaging. They avoid interacting with their students of color because they're so afraid that they're going to express bias.
Oh gosh.
And same thing for managers and organizations. They start not wanting to work as much with their colleagues of color. And of course, that makes a more negative environment. This is one of the ways that DEI, some types of DEI, the ones that kind of do that, have
Mhm.
backfired. They end up making things worse rather than better because they get people so worried they're going to express bias that they actually end up expressing more bias, less inclusion.
And I think also, like you were talking about superstition as one of the many things that you study as well. For some reason, religion comes up, and not to get too in the weeds with it, but shaming doesn't work either. And
Absolutely not.
I think that is something that can be unfortunately really common, right? Like the
Yeah, and if
shame.
you absolutely, and if you listen to some of the rhetoric that's against the current kind of anti-DEI push that we're getting at the national level, especially, it's talking about the shaming kind of stuff. And they cite things like, oh, it's making white people feel ashamed to be white, or things like that. And some people are closing their ears and not hearing those complaints, but there are real unfortunately bad DEI programs that have existed and created some of this reactance, created some of this negative reaction. And I think as a society, we need to wrestle with that. We need to understand there have been some missteps in DEI as an industry or whatever you want to call it. And actually, the scientific literature, the evidence base, has a lot of information about how we can fix those problems. And so promoting evidence-based approaches to DEI is what I'm all about.
I love that. You have some wonderful resources. You've published a lot of incredible papers. In my mind, you're quite a hero
Thank
and
you.
like groundbreaking, awesome stuff. It's sad that it's groundbreaking though, right? It's like want it to be common sense and this just comes with our hearts, but maybe what you're proving is that it is. We have these wonderful natural abilities to truly have a harmonious society. And there's reasons why there are the biases that we have, and there's ways that we can overcome them and break them down. And you have diverse joy. So, diverse joy as a concept, as well as diverse joy as your podcast, where you get to share your wisdom with a friend of yours, a colleague of yours. Do you want to talk a little bit about your podcast?
Absolutely. Just as a little more lead into it. So, what we've been talking about, this training program we have, and all those resources you mentioned, people can get them at biashabit.com. We have free videos, lots of free stuff for everyone. But it's all built around this thing called the bias habit breaking training. That's the training program that I alluded to. We've tested it in over a dozen randomized controlled studies, and it's shown wonderful effects in an array of kind of DEI sorts of outcomes. Really great stuff, if I flatter myself.
Let's hear from our sponsor.
This episode of Be the Glitter is brought to you by New Valley Labs. In 2023, we set out to build the type of firm we would have wanted to work with when we were building. Not a bunch of consultants with branded PowerPoint frameworks or ex-corporate guys sharing best practices, but founders like us. Scrappy outsiders who have been in the trenches and come out the other side. Building and funding startups in the Midwest is hard enough. Our startup studio was born from the frustration of not finding genuine resources for founders who don't always fit the typical mold. Our crew is made up of veteran founders who've built empires, hustling for funding, and celebrated serious wins. We're here to disrupt the norm and give a voice to the underdogs. Diverse, underrepresented founders and fearless innovators who are building the next generation of unicorns. Welcome to New Valley, where founders bloom. Email us at hello@newvalleylabs.com to help start or boost your journey as a startup founder.
And now back to our episode with Dr. Bill Cox.
Yeah, you probably have seen some amazing success stories that you can just recite off the top of your head.
Yeah, so there was one company after our training. One of the things we teach people is to really be curious and to understand how an individual's bias gets institutionalized. It gets built into social systems. You hear people talk a lot about systemic or institutional forms of bias. And this guy took it upon himself to investigate something he thought was a little weird. So their mail that came in that was like potential clients and things had a sorting system, and they got marked with an L for low priority or an H for high priority. He was like, everyone thought it was some kind of AI thing or the computer knew what it was doing. Turns out, as he started investigating, the people in the mailroom, they were like, oh no, we programmed the computer. It's based on zip code. And he kept digging into it, and it went back to, I think, around when zip codes were first invented. The company had a policy with a manual sorting procedure that the mail from Black neighborhoods got marked low priority. And it was someone who made a racist decision a long time ago. But then each person in the mailroom, they're just teaching a procedure. It's, hey, this list of numbers goes in this pile. And it was a manual procedure that just got passed on. And then eventually when they got a computerized thing, it got programmed into it. This is it's just a great example of institutional bias, things getting built into an institution that systemically disadvantages, in this case, Black folks. And because this guy learned about some of that in our training, took it on himself to investigate this. He was like, look at what is happening. And the company, of course, was mortified. And I am forbidden from saying what company it was for for understandable
That's
reasons.
okay.
But
Important thing is it was a company who decided to make
and
change.
they made a change. And it was because of one person took it upon himself, he connected with those personal values like I was talking about, and he went and made a change. And as you said, I have many stories like that, stories that are in my book, which we'll talk about a little later.
Yes.
But yes, so through the research, we have kind of systemic or empirical evidence. And then through people who, after our training was testing and prove it, had me come and give the training at their organizations, I start seeing how they're applying it just purely in the real world without it being connected to a research study. And that's been very rewarding.
I love this. We need more success stories brought out into the light because they are happening.
Yeah.
Like podcast with Angelica from Italy. She got hired by Maserati to do DEI
Uh-oh.
training, and they brought her back 2 or 3 times.
Uh-huh.
And it's, yeah, this is a sports car. We tend to think of sports car brands maybe maybe we don't think of them as being so inclusive. But the big question that she kept hearing from the people at Maserati were, how do we become the best allies? And what can for our fellow employees who do identify as LGBTQ? And I like to add A on there as well. But yeah, we can stereotype everything from sports cars to zip
Yeah.
codes to, yeah, even just DEI.
And that's the fact that we stereotype so many different things. Also, problems take so many different forms. If I were just to set out to design a new training and I'd never done any of this before, I probably wouldn't thought of check your mail sorting zip code thing. That's something that has to come from within. Someone in the company has to know, here's how my workflow operates, here's where bias can come into it. And so what our training does is it really teaches them the skills that they can generalize and customize and problem solve themselves, in addition to some help from us. But
Yes.
really equipping people to be agents of change is how we have always talked about it, which is then the name of our nonprofit, Inequity Agents of Change, because each and every person can work on these things and can make a meaningful difference.
And because you're a PH, you've earned this. And if we can give a lot more credit to your way of explaining it, just for those in the back, do you mind explaining in your terms what the difference is between equality and equity? Because I think still people get confused about what that means.
So equality is just treating everyone the same. Equity is trying to get everyone to the same place,
Mhm.
which is a bit different. It can recognize that they're not starting on equal footing, that someone might need different accommodations if they're in a wheelchair, for instance. You don't want to treat someone in a wheelchair exactly the same way you treat someone who can walk without any assistance. That would actually be rude. But you want everyone to be able to get to the top floor of the building. So you make sure it has an elevator. That's an example of equity.
Yeah,
And
perfect.
it can also be things, race, gender, sexual orientation. Feeling included can be a big part of that. So the inclusion part of things as well. Someone who's from a less stigmatized group coming to work, they might not even think they think they belong, and so they don't even worry about it. Someone who's the only LGBTQ plus person in the workplace, that's something in their head that they have to face every day. Oh, I'm the only one in my group. Are people going to judge me based on my identities and so on? Same for people of color, same for women in male dominated fields. So equity is really focusing on here's where we want people to get, and taking into account that kind of the starting points might be different because of systemic problems or other things.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you so much for bringing that into such a full circle, well-rounded example, because it's not just about one marginalized community or another.
Yeah.
It goes beyond what some people might allow their brains to seek. Let's please talk about your book and the podcast,
Yeah.
because they're such beautiful ways of sharing what you do with the rest of the world.
I've done this work testing and developing and refining this training program for 20 years now. Over a dozen randomized controlled studies. I'm repeating myself now, but
Okay.
it was always a one and done sort of thing. Like people got the training or they were randomly assigned to be in a control group, and then we watched them over time. But that actually is not the best way to learn. We put a lot of other good learning things into how we designed the training, but the training worked without kind of boosters. Ideally, you would give people boosters to remind them of the stuff they learned and to keep staying engaged. And we were very lucky that people were just hooked by our content, that it worked even without that. But I always knew we should be doing something else. And so the idea of a podcast came about. And I have my dear friend, Dr. Amber Nelson. She's a pediatric clinical psychologist. So she does therapy, things like that. And our training program adopts a lot of things that are taken from evidence-based clinical therapies like cognitive behavior therapy and acceptance and commitment therapy. But I was never actually trained as a therapist. I just read about it and adapted it. But she was. And so she's my dear friend, Dr. Amber Nelson, fabulous Black woman in Oregon.
She's fat.
And we have so much fun together. And I was like, let's do a podcast. And the way the joy thing came about, I was getting ready for her to come out. She flew to Madison to do the recording because we record in person and wear fun outfits and everything.
Come out physically to Madison from
yes,
Portland, not come out of
exactly.
a closet.
Oh, correct. No. She's a wonderful ally to the LGBTQ plus community, but she's a fabulous straight woman.
Yeah.
And I just kept feeling the joy in my chest and my heart. Oh, my friend's coming. She's going to be here for a week. We're going to have so much fun. And this was at the cusp of when the idea of queer joy and Black joy started, especially, I think, getting a lot of attention and hashtags going off. And the stuff I do is about all different types of identities. So it's okay, queer joy, trans joy, Black joy, everyone's talking about this stuff. What about diverse joy? And I asked Amber, and she was, oh, yes, I love that. And if you want people to stay engaged with any kind of learning, there are two big things. One is utility, like the stuff they're learning needs to be useful for them. And that's what our training does fundamentally. And the second is to make it pleasurable, to make it joyful, engaging, exciting, something that they want to do. And so that's what we did with this podcast. We focus on infusing joy into diversity discussions. We bring in a lot of the evidence and the science. We bring in content from the training. Each episode has a little portion where I review one of the skills that we teach in the training. So by listening to the podcast, you can really get all the training content for free. Again, we're a nonprofit trying to put this out there to do good in the world.
That's great.
And we do it all joyfully. And the training, when I do it, it's usually kind of a 3-hour block. There's only so much you can cover. But in the podcast, we can have a whole episode just about weight bias. And we did. Yeah. Or a whole episode about immigration, which is what this month's was. We had an immigrant from China on as our guest. And she talked about her experiences with belonging before recent awful cultural shift and then how she's felt afterwards. So very interesting. And that kind of highlights, although we focus on joy, we don't avoid difficult topics. Sometimes I worry people think we're like all bubblegum and happy stuff without dealing with negative reality. We 100% tackle difficult topics head on. But the net effects going through a whole episode is to uplift and make you feel joy. We share media recommendations that both can help work against bias and uplift you. And this idea of joy is scientifically validated. There's some scientists who define bias as having less joy related to people who are different from you. We tend to have more joy with people who are similar to us. Unless you're like me and grew up interracially, your family is probably the same race as you. And so you have more happy, joyful memories related to that. And so cultivating joy that is more diverse, bringing more diversity into your joy and your happiness is a proven, strongly evidence-based, is how I would say it, way to help reduce bias. And so we try to do that with diverse joy. And we're now 5% of all podcasts in the world. So yay.
That's fantastic. And is that just in general out of all podcasts or just in a certain category?
All podcasts. So it's listennotes.com is the website. They have an algorithm where they calculate based on listeners and return listeners and stuff. And top 5%.
Oh my gosh, that's so great. We love joy in this podcast. And we're often talking about trans joy. That's been definitely a very common theme here. But I love that you're talking about diverse joy. There's so many different ways to embrace joy and express joy, share joy. I think joy can sometimes be a little bit infectious.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's why we like glitter, right? It's like sticks in all the crevices.
There you go. Absolutely.
Carry that joy with you everywhere. So the book, show the book again, please. It's so beautiful. Overcoming Bias Habits, an evidence-based guide.
An evidence-based guide to creating a joyfully inclusive world. Got to have the joy in there, right?
Got to. And inclusive.
So basically, it's a book version of our training. Usually training is me talking and working with people. This is just in a different format where people can do it in their own time. It includes stories, the one I shared about the zip codes, that one's in there, and many other stories from workplaces where people have applied what we teach. And it's a short book. It's tight. It's all science-based, evidence-based, but it's not a science textbook. So you don't need to know all the ins and outs of this person's study and how someone else did an experiment to test the confound of something. It's not like that at all. It's really tightly linked to the practical skills, what you can start doing, how you can start applying things yourself.
Oh man. So there's no balancing of chemical equations or anything?
No, none of that. We tell you a little bit about how your brain works, but in very down to earth, relatable examples.
I love that. I love that.
And I have to thank all the people who've been through our training throughout the years for
Yes, I was
sharing
gonna
their
say,
stories.
let's talk
'Cause
about when it comes out,
oh,
how we get your book, where to get your book, and all the people that you need to thank,
yeah.
because I know you've got a nice, long, beautiful list.
It is available everywhere. I've seen it at every retailer I've checked. Just search for Overcoming Bias Habits. Make sure you get that habits word in there. It's on Amazon. It's on Barnes and Noble. You can get it directly from my publisher and everywhere else. For those who are, I'm guessing a lot of your listeners are in Madison.
Yep.
A Room
Around
of
the
One's
world.
Own has it on their website, so you can order it through them if you like A
Nice.
Room of One's Own. It's a nice local bookshop. Yeah, and so thanking people, I actually say in the beginning of the book, in the acknowledgments, that the stories in the book are really not mine. Like I share one or two that are mine, but the stories
Yeah.
are from the hundreds of people who have been through our training program and then were gracious enough to share their stories with me. In like very early versions of the training, we would actually explain more of the science just because that was the best way we had to explain something. So we'd walk people through a research study, but sometimes that can get tedious. But then we would have a participant who we walked them through this research study to understand how self-fulfilling prophecy works or something like that. And then they would just give us an example, like the zip code example I shared earlier from their life, real practical. And then we're like, oh, that's such a good example. Then the next time we update the training, we use their example instead of everyone needing to learn all the research study and then learn how to apply it in life. They can get more directly to applying it in their daily lives. Thanks to all these people who have shared their stories over the years. And then that is what has become the book, explaining the basics in an approachable way, and then using people's real stories to help you think about various ways to do this stuff better in real life.
And you've got a really awesome support system, right? I mean, between who helps you with your podcast and who helps you with your book and just who helps you at home.
Yeah, I have a wonderful husband who I should also thank. He's also the producer of the podcast. He's a professional graphic designer and videographer and photographer. So shout out to Eric Roman Binding. If anyone around Madison needs photos or videos done, he's a wonderful photographer. You can see him at ericromanbinding.com.
That. And again, what can we do to help you besides buy your book and listen to your podcast?
Those two things are wonderful. If everyone does that, I'm super happy. If anyone wants, they can donate to our nonprofit. Again, that's at biashabit.com. But also go there just to use the free resources. Of course, we love donations that'll help us survive awful time. We used to get research funding from the federal government, but that's just impossible now for our kind of work. But we want the world to have this information. So there are little videos of me explaining things. There are playlists on YouTube. In addition to the podcasts, share our resources with other people, use them yourselves. That help us make the world a better place. That's what I want most of all.
And are you still taking gigs teaching these principles for different organizations and companies?
Yes, absolutely. People can email me or there's a form on our website. Now that we don't get research funding, that's the main way we're able to bring in money. So yes, if you want our training for your organization, get in touch with us and we'll work something out. We do it via Zoom, like you and I are talking over right now. So in person, which is always a lot of fun, but in our research, both have been equally effective. So either way.
Oh, that's fantastic. Good for you that you're able to really make that mark and that positive rippling effect of positive change, regardless of whether it's virtually or in person.
Absolutely. And it opens up more opportunities because if someone doesn't have enough funding to fly me out and have a hotel and all that, I can reach more people. I got to speak, I gave the training to the legislature of the state of Washington a few years back.
Isn't that great?
And yeah, like huge pharmaceutical company was the last one I did. There are just many great people out there who are still doing doing some of this work.
They
making myself
care.
available. Yes, because they care.
They care, and it works. If we have true, diverse, and inclusive, joyful work environments, imagine the productivity of that and the profitability of that, let alone,
Yeah, the research shows that bias harms productivity, harms the bottom line, which we are always thinking about how corporations care about that. If you think about if someone says something rude to me or some kind of slight against me because of my identity, that takes up space in my mind throughout the rest of the day and reduces my productivity. But also someone who accidentally says something wrong, says something racist or sexist, didn't really mean it. Their day is also a little deranged because then they're like, oh gosh, why did I say that? They probably think I'm such a jerk. And part of what our training does, it gives people tools to address those things so that you can address problems head on and overcome them.
I love it. I'm looking forward to getting your book. I'm so grateful for you that you took some of your precious time to be on the podcast. And I hope other people get to enjoy what you're sharing with the world too.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. I'm super happy to be here.